In this lesson, we're going to be talking about units. If you're following along, go ahead and open up units.html in your working files folder. Now, CSS3 comes with a number of new units, specifically the rem, the viewport width, and the viewport height. Before we get into the new ones, let's do a quick review of what we already have. Here we have a bunch of divs with class of unit. As you can see, they're typical, normal block level elements. They don't have any width set, and each one of these temporary divs has its own class, unit px, m, rem, %. What we're going to do is give each of these their own width. The px one, let's give it a pixel width. If I save and refresh, you can see that indeed, this now has a width of 50 pixels. Now let's take a look at m's and rems. Rems is the new one. So let's start off with m's. If I save this and refresh it over here, you'll see that they both have the same width. Now this width is 5 of the widths of the letter M. That's a way of measuring relative to the font size. That means that if the font size gets bigger, the size of one M will actually get bigger. Now rems are exactly the same thing. The only difference between M's and rems are that M's are relative to their parent's font size. Rems are relative to the entire document's font size. So let me show you what I mean by that. Up here we have a CSS selector for our wrapper div. If I change the font size of the wrapper, you'll notice that rem does not change, but M does change in width. That's because this gray wrapper box has a larger font size, so M's are affected. But again, rems, our new unit, are relative to the font size of the entire document, not just the parent. That means in order to affect rems, I need to change the font size on the HTML tag. So that's the difference between M and rem, and one reason why we need rem. Oftentimes when we're setting widths using M's, things can get confusing, because children of children of children have different font sizes set, and then the size of one M that you end up with at the end may be different one place versus another place. Rems gives us the opportunity to standardize this across our entire document based on the entire document's font size. Let's move on. We also have unit %. We've seen this one before as well. And if I refresh, you'll see that it takes indeed 5% of the width of its parent. If I make this bigger, you'll notice that the parent gets bigger and the % div gets bigger. Now this is also important because if I change the size of the wrapper, you'll notice that the % doesn't change size anymore because it's relative to the width of the wrapper. We also have VW and VH. VW stands for viewport width and VH stands for viewport height. When I resize the width, you'll notice that this is not changing necessarily. If I hit refresh though, you'll notice it does change. Currently, VW and VH are a little bit buggy in browser implementations, so you have to keep that in mind. Now, if you're doing this at home, you might have better success than me. If I change the viewport height to be much smaller and refresh, you'll notice that indeed, the width of this element has shrunk, but this element has stayed the same. Now, we also have a couple other units which I'm going to just tell you about instead of showing you. You can also set the width to something like 5vmin. That will take the viewport width and the viewport height, and it'll take whichever is smallest and use that as the measurement. Similarly, we have vmax. And that does the exact same thing. It takes the viewport width and the viewport height, and it figures out which one is bigger and uses that one. Now, just to demonstrate, I can also show you how we can set the font size based on VW or VH. Notice how the more information link has gotten smaller? If we change the width of the viewport and refresh, you'll notice that it's bigger. Eventually, once browser support is entirely there, this will be a way of solving the heading that we don't want to wrap, but we always want it to be big. We can set the font size using the viewport width, and then as the page gets wider, the heading will get bigger, and vice versa. So those are some of the new units that we have with CSS3. Like I mentioned, browser support is a little bit shoddy, but you can always go to caniuse.com and look up units. Here's the browser support for rems, and you can see that it works just great in all of our browsers aside from IE8 and below. So there's a quick rundown of all of our new units with CSS3.